Hey YouTube, it's David from Live Forever or Die Trying, and today I have my Nonfiction November wrap-up for you. To quickly touch on what that is, if you didn't catch the TBR or anything else that's happening on YouTube at the moment, Nonfiction November is a kind of readathon hosted by Olive of a Book Olive and team. I'll link all their info in the section below. But basically, they give us 4 prompts to correspond to reading specific books, basically to have you branch out to read something you wouldn't have otherwise. So that's kind of the reason I participated. You know that I read a lot of nonfiction anyways, but without these prompts I would have read different books, and honestly these prompts led me to read books that opened new doors for me. I actually did an interview with one of the authors for a book I wouldn't have read otherwise, and I also have to thank Steve Donahue for that as well, for putting the bug in my ear that author interviews are even something that I can do with a channel my size. I would have thought it would have been a lot harder. Let me know if you want a video about that, by the way, like a individual standalone about how to do that process, or maybe once I become a better interviewer, how to conduct interviews. I'm not there yet, but as you know, this whole channel is a learning process. I want to show that if I can become a reader as a literary failure in high school, then anybody can. But let's not ramble too much. Let's jump into the actual wrap-up. I read 3 books according to the prompts. One's coming in December, and then I read an additional 4 or 5 books that I will wrap up as well that were not related to the prompt. So first up, I had Mescaline. And you know from my TBR, if you watched that, and I'll link that here, or my interview, which I'll link that here, that this book was an absolute pleasure. Everything from just the design of it, to the illustrations inside, to how Mike J just wrote the book. You might know from my previous videos that my favorite type of book is one that has good historical and scientific context, but it's not dry, like the author brings it to life. So somebody like Michael Pollan or Yuval Noah Harari, the way that you can combine and weave personal experience to kind of liven the historical, anthropological, cultural history. And Mike J did a phenomenal job of doing this here. If you're not familiar, mescaline is a psychedelic compound that's derived from the San Pedro and peyote cactus. It is of the phenethylamine class, so it is different from something like a classical psychedelic like DMT, ayahuasca, LSD, or psilocybin magic mushrooms. So it's an entirely different compound, but it has similar effects. Basically what we do in this book is Mike takes us through the global history. You know, what's its cultural significance, scientific significance, and how was it used to kind of shape different societies into what they were. So we start off in the Andean mountain range with the people of Chavin. Check the interview for the correct pronunciation. But it talks about its indigenous use in the Americas as well, and how that kind of adapted when they became under persecution from the white people, whether it was the Spanish or the Europeans or what have you, which I guess is redundant. Regardless, they ended up actually taking the Native American culture and kind of like assimilating to a little bit of Christianity, and they actually had this spin-off of Heaven where they had like a psychedelic afterlife that was based on Christianity with the cactus. Just like fascinating stuff. At one point in the 1890s, Mormonism gets involved, and then it gets synthesized in the 1920s as a powdered form that can be used in medicine. Thus why the subtitle here is A Global History of the First Psychedelic. So other psychedelics have a longer history of use, but mescaline was the reason that the term psychedelic came to be what it is, because of just, it was the first to be used in a scientific context. But yeah, well, one of my standout favorite parts of this book was that when used by the indigenous peoples, they focused on the spiritual aspects, the religious aspects, the community building and cultural reinforcing aspects of using this mescaline drug as a tool for their people, as kind of like a cultural glue. And then the first thing Westerners do when they get a hold of it is they say, hey, this does crazy shit to your eyes, man. And then some of them freak out, and it just seems they have like a much less worldly response to using the same tool. Of course, now we're using psychedelics in modern science at Johns Hopkins and whatnot for treating PTSD and what have you, but that's a whole different topic. To learn more about this as like a whole, be sure to check out the interview because we touched on a lot of the culture and a lot of the scientific usage of this. All right, without having this whole video being taken up by this book, let's jump into the second prompt, which was discovery. And for discovery, oh, I completely forgot to mention, the prior prompt was buzz, thus mescaline. For discovery, I was trying to discover a new topic, which was EMFs. I was turned on to this book by people like Ben Greenfield and some of these biohackers. And within biohacking, it's a lot of work to separate kind of the wheat from the chaff. You know, what's real science and what's not? What can you rely on and adopt, patterns of living that are going to improve yourself, and like what's just bullshit. And I'm still up in the air after reading this book. So this is called the Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs. And basically, EMFs are like electromagnetic fields. So wireless signals, power lines, what have you. And it's a real thing. And with strong enough electromagnetic waves, you can break DNA and you can do pretty disastrous shit to your body. Now, the question is, are cell phones doing that? Are they causing cancer? Are laptops causing lower sperm counts? What have you? And that's what I was hoping this book was going to answer. In my TBR for this month, you saw me say that this had a lot of sources in it, and that's correct, but in my opinion, they were low quality. So a lot of the sources in this book, he's sourcing articles that are from, give me a second, I'll find an example. But here's like a source from just youtube.com, or here's a source from pbs.org, and it's literally like just the main website. You have to dig to the back of the book to find which YouTube video it actually is. And then he'll like sort findings from a scientific article, but instead of linking to like the National Institute of Health or what have you, he links to livescience.com or the weepinitiative.org or these different websites that report on the studies, but not the actual studies themselves. And the whole book's kind of written in this bro science-y kind of way, like, I'm down to earth, I'm just one of you, I'm trying to learn this for myself. And I can appreciate that, but I know it's not for everybody. It's not written by a scientist. So all that said, with me not trusting the sources 100%, the author even admits that we don't have the answers. We don't know why certain stuff happens the way it happens. We know certain things, like if you put a cell phone down with a phone call going in a circle of ants, then the ants will, run in a circle around it. We know that EMFs affects certain animals through these studies, but we don't know how and if there's any long-term consequences to that. So all in all, I'm not going to take any action off this book. I am going to read more about this topic because I'm still thoroughly undecided about what any of this even means. What I might actually do is put my phone on airplane mode and then track with my Aura ring if there's any biometric changes, heart rate variability, deep sleep, REM sleep, what have you. And then for the time prompt, I had The Ageless Generation by Alex Zoronikov. This book, I was hoping for something different, and that was my fault. So when I read The Ageless Generation, How Advances in Biomedicine Will Transform the Global Economy, I thought, hell yeah, this is going to go right in line with two other books I'm reading about alternatives to capitalism once we reach a point that robots can replace jobs. And that's something, in my opinion, that we should be striving for. I hope for a future that we don't need store clerks or we don't need truck drivers. And through no fault of their own, I just hope those people can live a more meaningful life and not have to trade time for value. I hope for an altruistic utopia. It's far out there, it's idealistic, I recognize that, that's not what we're talking about. But what this book ended up talking about, it focused the brunt of the book on this is the problem we have to solve, which that problem is being our baby boomer generation. We have this basically bell curve of people where the majority of our population, whether we're a developed country like Germany or the US or Japan, or what's going to happen to these third world countries that are elevating their population and their standard of living. What you have happen is as people get more educated, more well off, they end up having less and less kids. So the baby boomer generation in the US and Japan, for example, is way bigger than the millennials and the Zoomers. So as the older population dies off, we're going to have a large class of working class baby boomers move into retirement and a smaller amount of millennials and Zoomers to pay the taxes to support Social Security. So I'm hoping this book was going to talk about, anti-aging is going to fix this because of blah, blah, blah. What this book ended up talking about is it said, you know what the solution to this problem with old people not working is? We're going to get old people to work. And how do we do that? We make them live longer. And I'm like, this is like the least altruistic way that you could go about this, man. Like, you could say that, using these technologies is going to allow people to further their expertise and make developments which are going to do this. It's going to allow economists to live longer lives and solve these problems this other way. He's like, no, we just need bodies in the capitalist system. And complete credit to the man, it's a solution. If you make people live longer, you will not have these taxpayers paying off these people who can't work because they will work. But in my opinion, that's not like a satisfying life. Like, it feels like a Band-Aid fix to me. It still kind of rides the coattails of technology, but then you have this other thing creeping up on it, which is like automation, which is like once you have these jobs that are no longer necessary, you're going to return to this problem in the future as well. But all in all, would I recommend this to like a new reader of like longevity? I think I would, because it does cover a lot of the basic science and it has really well-sourced statistics on what led to this problem. It has a lot of good stuff that you can read about this topic as a jumping off point if you haven't considered, our burgeoning elderly class. One statistic that jumped out to me specifically was like in Japan, who has this problem the worst right now, and soon is going to be us in China, is they have 1.1 working adult to retiree, and an average of $25,000 comes out of the average working person in Japan's paycheck to subsidize their social security system, which to me is like bonkers. Like, it needs a fix. But yeah, I think all in all, I'd recommend this book if you are a beginner to the topic. So the fourth prompt was movement, for which I was going to read a political movement book, which is The War on Normal People by Andrew Yang, The Truth About America's Disappearing Jobs and Why Universal Basic Income is Our Future. Basically talking about some of the stuff the Ageless Generation is talking about, people aging out of the workforce as well as jobs being replaced by automation. I have a book club talk that I'll be filming and putting out after this, prior to my December wrap-up, but you'll be seeing this in the December wrap-up as well. So that wraps up our prompts. We get into the 3 or 4 books that I had for the remainder of the month. And the first of which also plays off the last 2, which is Fully Automated Luxury Communism. And this is a very provocative title. And it's a gorgeous cover, gorgeous hardcover. It's well sourced. I will say, to rehash what I said in my political haul video, I do not know where I stand on the political spectrum right now. Like, obviously I would subscribe to kind of transhumanism and a futurist slant on whatever politics are relevant in the moment, but I don't know what economic system I prefer, what means of distribution, what policies. Obviously I agree on most of your standard progressive human rights issues, but everything else I'm kind of up in the air on. I need to learn more about before I develop a position. But this book makes a good argument, let me tell you. So, in Fully Automated Luxury Capitalism, communism, I do not want to get that mixed up. So, Fully Automated Luxury Communism, Aaron Bastani here is talking about post-scarcity economics. And basically, from my understanding as somebody who doesn't know a lot about it, is in a world that we have not enough jobs for everybody and abundance of production, whether that is a full-scale solar energy like grid, or whether that is mining asteroids for raw materials, in a post-scarcity economic world, do we want a small elite of individuals controlling this wealth to distribute as they see fit? Or do we want to do a more socialist, communist slant on how we distribute these goods? Specifically, this takes a Marxist approach to this problem. You know, he said, hey, full automation of the economy is coming. We are going to have an unnecessary class. This is going to be a thing that happens. Longevity technology is coming. This is going to be a thing that happens. How is our society going to react to this? And then it lays out kind of a Marxist approach. One thing about Marxism that has always kind of intrigued me is it seems like it was written for a society based around scarcity. And when you introduce post-scarcity or automation, artificial intelligence into Marxism, what happens? And that's why I really enjoyed this book, is it kind of attempts to answer a lot of those questions. Marxism is something I want to learn more about, and I just haven't found an accessible way to do so, or sit down to read my 10 books of theory yet. But I think this was a great jumping off point. For somebody who's very new to politics, it was easy to understand, it made a lot of sense, it was well sourced. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to reading more about fully automated luxury communism, or even a capitalist approach, which is kind of what feels like Andrew Yang's trying to get at in the War of Normal People, or War on Normal People. So yeah, super interesting stuff. I hope to read more in line with that in the future. If you have any recommendations for Marxism or communist like literature, preferably something that critiques it as well as says what's good about it in the same book, I would really love to hear that. Link those recommendations in the comments below if you would. Up next, we had another political book, which was The Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal by Noam Chomsky and Robert Pollin. This is written interview style, and I really like this book. It's very level-headed. So you have an interviewer interviewing Noam and Robert and basically saying, hey, here's 20 critiques of your global Green New Deal. How do we solve them? Like, what do you want to say to people who don't believe this is a viable option? And I love the approach of this book. I wish more books would just strictly address the problems of what they're proposing and not saying, here's our idealistic situation. If you critique it, you're a terrible person. So he brings up stuff like, you know, what happens to the jobs in oil and fracking and natural gas that are going to be replaced? He answers hard questions like that. He also talks about, like, reeling back in our emissions. He said, hey, the coronavirus is a great example about why reducing emissions does not work. He's like, we reduced emissions by like 30 to 40% when the virus hit. We shut down the economy. He's like, in the most drastic way that you can reduce emissions, we only saw these like single-digit percentage like increases in what we measure climate change. He's like, that doesn't do much. What we need to be thinking about is a more progressive approach, phasing out these things to go full solar. We don't need to use less energy. We need to replace what means we produce energy with. It also goes into talk about like a lot of social issues. Like, for example, what I thought was fascinating was carbon taxes. He says carbon taxes disproportionately hurt the poor because a larger percentage of their budget is purchasing things like gas or heating or electricity, and that a rich person could like stomach carbon taxes much better, so that might not be a viable solution. And really, it's a great critique on something that he is very for, and I really love the nuance that was in this book. If you are for or against the global Green New Deal, I'd probably recommend this regardless. And then finally, I think I wrapped up the month with the end of policing. And this was a fascinating book as well. I need to find a new adjective for books, but it kind of was like a history of policing as a whole. Like, you know, how did policing start? It was originally used in Europe and the Americas as either union busters or slave catchers, which I didn't know, which that was fascinating. And then he talks about the evolution of what the police force is meant to do, what its role is in the war on drugs, and SWAT teams and the militarization of the police. And then what I especially like, which seems to be a recurring theme in these books is he talks about the pros of the police. You know, what are police good at? What value do they provide to society? And then comes back and says, hey, and here's the 80 things that they're doing terribly right now, and how these systems that are supposedly good actually can be disproportionately discriminatory. Specifically talking about like algorithms within the police force. Like certain algorithms do increase the amount of crime that's stopped. However, they are feedback loops. If you use this Crime Watch program that says, you know, hey, poor people of this particular zip code, which is supposed to be non-discriminatory because they're attacking a zip code, not attacking, you know, like a color of people, then, you know, you can find more crimes. But even though it's blind to colorism, that zip code might still be 80% minority or what have you. And then it reinforces its own algorithm by saying, hey, because we sent you here, you found crime, which means there is crime here, which means we need to send you back. And just keeps going on a loop like that. So all in all, I thought it was a pretty well-balanced book. It's obviously more towards abolishing the police, or at least reinventing what they do as a whole. But I thought it was a valuable read, nonetheless. And yeah, so that's my nonfiction November. It was a really good reading month for me. I'm hoping December's going to be even better. But I would like your guys' and girls' opinions. So I have 1,600 of you now here, which is like phenomenal. I never expect to get this big on YouTube at all. I'm taking the next week off kind of as a staycation from work, and I hope to be putting on a lot of new content on this channel. So I have more author interviews. I have some like open forum discussions with some friends of mine about books we're reading together. Obviously I have wrap-ups. I want to do some best of list. But if you have any suggestions at all, what topics you want me to cover, what topics you want me to cover less of, like, you know, is politics, you know, a little too much for you? Would you like other stuff in here? Let me know all your feedback, because I'm constantly trying to improve this channel and then make it something that you all benefit from as well. Obviously, this is my own little project for keeping track of what I'm reading and kind of, you know, logging my learning process. The whole idea behind this is, if I'm a kid that dropped out of AP Literature in high school and just barely scraped by getting extra credits in summer school, if I can read and learn these topics, I believe you can as well. So if that's something that you kind of align yourself with, let me know. I want this channel to be something that you get benefit from, as well as me just having as kind of a reading log. So yeah, if you're along for the journey, make sure to subscribe as always. Make sure to hit the like and the bell as well. It'll help push the channel along the algorithm, give me more resources and more social pressure to make more of these. But yeah, I'll be seeing y'all very soon. Hopefully have a lot more content coming down the line. Peace.